The stars looked different from up here. Minji pressed her hand against the observation window of the Galactic Military Academy and watched the ships coming and going from the orbital station. 3 years ago, she never imagined she would be here, floating above a planet called Tertius Prime, surrounded by aliens who barely acknowledged her existence. The academy was massive, a ring of metal and glass that housed 10,000 cadets from across the galaxy. Every species that belonged to the Galactic Council sent their best warriors here to train. The corridors were wide enough for the enormous Kravik beetles to pass through, and the ceilings high enough for the flying Mothra to soar between classes. Minji had to walk carefully, always watching where she stepped because most aliens simply didn't see her. At 160 centimeters tall, she was small even by human standards, and humans were already considered tiny compared to most galactic species. She heard the heavy footsteps behind her before she saw the reflection in the window. 3 Vorath cadets were approaching, their reptilian scales clicking softly against the metal floor. Minji didn't turn around. She had learned in her first week that showing fear only made things worse. "Look, it's the human," one of them said. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "I thought they cleaned the pest problem in this sector." The other 2 laughed. Minji kept staring at the stars, her face neutral. Her instructor, Master Youngsu, had taught her many things before she left Earth. One of them was this: let them talk. Words are just air. Save your energy for when it matters. "I heard humans used to fight wars against each other," another Vorath said. "Can you imagine? Fighting your own species? They're so weak they couldn't find real enemies. Maybe that's why the council finally let them join," the third one added. They felt sorry for them. Like adopting a sick animal. Minji's hand moved to the blade at her hip, an old habit. The weapon was simple, just steel with a wrapped handle hanging in a worn sheath. It looked ancient compared to the plasma weapons and energy blades the other cadets carried. She could feel their eyes on it now. "Is that supposed to be a weapon?" The first Vorath stepped closer. Minji could see his reflection clearly now. His name was Crone, and he was nearly 2 meters tall with dark green scales and yellow eyes. "My people stopped using metal weapons 3,000 years ago. But I suppose humans are just catching up to civilization." Minji finally turned around. She looked up at Crone and his friends, her expression calm. "This weapon has been in my family for 200 years. It still cuts." Crone leaned down, bringing his massive head close to hers. His breath smelled like sulfur and meat. "Does it? Maybe we should test that. The training halls are open. Unless you're scared?" "I have class," Minji said simply. She moved to walk past them, but Crone's hand shot out and grabbed her shoulder. His claws, each as long as her fingers, dug slightly into her uniform. "I wasn't asking, human." For a moment, Minji considered it. She could feel the weight of the blade at her hip, could imagine the movements Master Youngsu had drilled into her over 10,000 hours of practice. But this wasn't the time. "Not yet. Let go of me," she said quietly. Crone's grip tightened. "Make me. Is there a problem here?" The voice came from behind the Vorath cadets. They turned and Minji saw Instructor Vexthor approaching. He was older than Crone, his scales darker and marked with scars from decades of combat. He was also much larger, his presence filling the corridor with authority. The Vorath cadets immediately stepped back and saluted. Minji saluted as well, though she knew what was coming. Vexthor barely glanced at the other cadets before his eyes settled on her. There was no warmth in that gaze, only cold assessment and something worse, dismissal. "Cadet Minji," he said. "You're late for tactical analysis." "Sir, I didn't ask for excuses. The Vorath cadets have valid training schedules. Do you have a complaint to file about their conduct?" Minji looked at Crone, who was smirking now. She looked back at Vexthor and saw the challenge in his eyes. If she complained, she would be marked as weak, unable to handle herself. If she didn't, the harassment would continue. It was a trap with no good answer. "No, sir," she said. "Good, then get to class. The rest of you, carry on." Vexthor walked away, his tail sweeping behind him. The Vorath cadets waited until he was gone before laughing again. Minji didn't wait to hear what else they had to say. She walked quickly toward the tactical analysis classroom, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The classroom was already full when she arrived. Cadets from 20 different species sat at their stations, their holographic displays showing battle simulations and fleet movements. Minji found her seat in the back corner, the one always left empty because it was designed for smaller species. Most of the other small species had dropped out of the academy within the first year. The training was brutal, designed for warriors who could go 3 days without sleep or who had natural armor, or who could process tactical data 3 times faster than humans. Minji had survived through stubbornness and midnight study sessions that left her exhausted and barely functional. Instructor Vexthor entered the room, and all conversation stopped. He moved to the center of the classroom where a massive holographic display showed the history of galactic conflicts. Today's lesson, according to the projection, was about failed military strategies. Today we will examine why primitive combat tactics have no place in modern warfare, Vexthor began. His eyes swept across the room and landed on Minji. Cadet Minji, since you're joining us late, perhaps you can provide insight. Your species has extensive experience with primitive warfare, doesn't it? Several cadets turned to look at her. Minji stood, as was required when called upon. Sir, humans have fought many wars, yes. 15,000 documented conflicts on your homeworld alone, Vexthor said. The holographic display changed, showing Earth's history as a timeline of battles, weapons, and territorial disputes. Your species couldn't even unify one planet without constant bloodshed. This is not the mark of warriors, Cadet. This is the mark of a species too aggressive and too foolish to evolve beyond violence. The display showed human weapons throughout history. Swords, guns, bombs, nuclear missiles. Each innovation looked crude compared to galactic technology. Minji felt heat rising in her cheeks but kept her voice steady. We survived, sir. Barely, Vexthor replied. And only because the galaxy found you before you destroyed yourselves. You are here as a courtesy, Cadet, because the Council believes in giving every species a chance. But make no mistake, humans are not warriors. You are survivors at best. There is a difference, Minji said nothing. What could she say? Everything Vexthor stated was technically true. Humanity had come close to extinction multiple times. Their technology was behind. Their bodies were weaker. They were the newest species in the Galactic Council, and nobody really wanted them there. The lesson continued, but Minji barely heard it. She stared at the holographic display of Earth, at the blue and green planet that seemed so far away now. She thought about her brother Taman, who was only 14 and still in school in Seoul. She had promised to make him proud, to show the galaxy that humans belonged among the stars. But 3 months into the academy, Minji was beginning to wonder if that was possible. Every day brought new challenges, new mockery, new reminders that she was different. The 12 humans who had been accepted this cycle stayed together when they could, forming a small group that ate meals together and studied together. But even among them, doubt was growing. When the class finally ended, Minji gathered her datapad and headed for the exit. Instructor Vexthor's voice stopped her at the door. Cadet Minji, a moment. She turned back. The classroom was empty now except for the 2 of them. Vexthor stood by his desk looking at his own datapad. He didn't look up when he spoke. The annual proving duels will be held in 3 weeks. It's a tradition where senior cadets and instructors face each other in combat trials. The cadets who perform well earn rank advancements. Those who fail are recycled back into basic training. Minji waited. She had heard about the proving duels. They were legendary, often brutal, and had resulted in serious injuries over the years. Most first-year cadets didn't participate. I've decided to select you as my opponent, Vexthor said. He finally looked up and Minji saw something cold in his eyes. It will be an excellent demonstration for the Academy, a way to show everyone exactly where humanity stands in the galactic hierarchy. You should feel honored. Minji's heart sank. This wasn't an honor. This was an execution. Vexthor had never lost a duel in 40 years of service. He was a legend, a warrior who had fought in 3 major galactic conflicts and survived battles that killed thousands. And he wanted a fighter, a first-year human cadet who barely came up to his chest. Do I have a choice, sir? She asked quietly. Vexthor smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Of course you do, cadet. You can always refuse and resign from the Academy. That is your right as a free citizen of the Council. In other words, no choice at all. If she refused, she would prove every negative thing ever said about humanity. She would return to Earth in shame, and the door would close on other humans who wanted to join the Academy. But if she fought, she would lose. Badly. And that would prove the same things. Minji Tho. News of the duel spread through the Academy faster than Minji expected. By the next morning, everyone knew that Instructor Vexthor had chosen the small human cadet as his opponent for the proving duels. The betting pools started immediately. The odds were 50-1 in Vexthor's favor, and even that seemed generous to most observers. Minji tried to focus on her regular classes, but everywhere she went, cadets stared and whispered. Some looked curious. Most looked amused. A few looked genuinely sorry for her, which somehow felt worse than the mockery. During combat training, her sparring partners went easier on her than usual, as if she were already broken and they didn't want to damage her further before the main event. Her only respite came from the other humans. Jiwon found her after lunch on the third day, pulling her into an empty study room. Jiwon was 2 years older, a communications specialist with short black hair and quick, nervous hands that were always moving when she talked. "You need to withdraw," Jiwon said without preamble. "I've been researching Vexthor's combat record. Minji, he's hospitalized 17 cadets in duels over the last 10 years. 17. And those were cadets from warrior species, not humans." Minji sat down at the study table and pulled out her datapad, pretending to review notes. "I can't withdraw. You know what that means?" "It means you live," Jiwon said. She sat down across from Minji and grabbed her hands, forcing her to look up. "It means you go home in one piece. Your pride isn't worth your life." "It's not about pride," Minji said quietly. "If I withdraw, what message does that send? That humans are cowards? That we can't handle the same challenges as every other species? How many more humans do you think the Academy will accept after that? I don't care about other humans right now. I care about you." The door opened and Doyen entered, carrying a tray of food from the cafeteria. He was tall for a human, thin and angular with glasses that he constantly adjusted. He worked in the engineering department and could take apart and rebuild almost any technology in the Academy. "Trying to talk sense into her?" he asked Jiwon as he set the tray down. "I've been attempting that for 3 days. She won't listen." "Because there's nothing to listen to," Minji said. She took one of the food containers from the tray and opened it, though she wasn't hungry. "I accepted the challenge. I'm going to fight." Doyen sat down heavily. "Then at least let us help. I can modify your blade, add a plasma edge or a vibrational frequency that would increase its cutting power." "We could—" "No modifications," Minji said firmly. "The rules say no advanced technology beyond standard issue equipment. If I cheat, it proves their point about humanity. Besides, this blade doesn't need modifications." She drew the weapon and laid it on the table. In the bright lights of the study room, it looked even more primitive than usual. The steel was old but well maintained, the edge sharp enough to catch the light. The handle was wrapped in leather that had been replaced many times over the decades, and the guard was simple, unadorned metal. Jiwon stared at it. "You're going to fight a 2-meter-tall armored warrior with advanced combat training, using a piece of metal your great-grandmother carried?" "Yes," Minji said. She ran her finger along the flat of the blade, not touching the edge. "Do you want to know why?" Her two friends waited. Minji had never talked much about her family, about why she carried such an old weapon when modern ones were available. She realized she should have told them earlier, should have helped them understand. But talking about it hurt, and she had been trying to focus on moving forward rather than looking back. "My great-grandmother carried this blade during the unification wars on Earth," Minji began. "She was a soldier when Korea was still divided, when humans were still fighting each other over borders and ideology and resources. She killed 17 enemy soldiers with this blade in close combat, not because she wanted to, but because she had to, because the alternative was letting her squad die." Minji picked up the blade and held it carefully. When the wars ended and Earth finally unified, she became a martial arts instructor. She taught my grandmother, who joined the First Colony Defense Forces. Back then, humans were just starting to explore our own solar system. They were pirates, raiders, people who thought the new colonies were easy targets. My grandmother used this blade to defend a mining station on Mars. 43 defenders against 200 raiders. They held for 6 days until reinforcements arrived. Doyen leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the weapon. Jiwon had gone very still. "My grandmother taught my mother," Minji continued, "and my mother carried this blade when she worked as security on civilian transport ships. She was on a refugee vessel traveling from Europa to Earth when raiders attacked. 300 families on that ship, mostly children. My mother and 4 other security officers fought the raiders in the corridors. She killed 8 of them before they finally brought her down. But she bought enough time for the ship to reach Earth's defense perimeter. All 300 families survived. Minji's voice had gotten quieter. She placed the blade back on the table between them. My mother didn't survive. I was 12 years old. But before she left on that last journey, she told me something. She said this blade has never been carried by someone who surrendered. Every person in my family who held this weapon fought when they had to fight, and they won when winning seemed impossible. That's what this blade means. Not pride, not stubbornness, just the simple fact that my family doesn't quit. The study room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Jiwon spoke, her voice thick. I'm sorry. I didn't know. It's okay, Minji said. She slid the blade back into its sheath. I don't talk about it much. But now you understand why I can't withdraw. It's not about me anymore. It's about everyone who carried this blade before me. If I give up without trying, I dishonor their memory. Doyen adjusted his glasses, a sure sign he was thinking hard. Okay, so modifications are out. But what about training? Do you have a plan? Minji nodded. I've been going to the training halls every night after everyone else leaves. Practicing the forms Master Youngsu taught me. He was my instructor back on Earth, an old man who learned from my grandmother. He taught me that human fighting styles developed differently than alien ones. We're smaller, weaker, slower, so we learn to be smarter, to read our opponents, to use their strength against them. Will that work against Vexthor? Jiwon asked. I don't know, Minji admitted, but it's all I have. For the next 2 weeks, Minji's life fell into a brutal rhythm. She attended classes during the day, enduring the stares and whispers. She ate meals quickly and quietly with Jiwon and Doyen, who had appointed themselves her unofficial support team. And every night, after the training halls emptied and the lights dimmed to night cycle mode, she practiced. The Academy's training halls were massive spaces with adjustable gravity and holographic opponents. Minji set the gravity to Earth normal and practiced the forms Master Youngsu had taught her. They had names like Willow in Wind and Stone Breaking Water and Tiger's Last Stand. Each form was a sequence of movements designed for specific combat situations. Master Youngsu had spent 30 years refining these forms, combining ancient Korean martial arts with practical lessons learned from 3 centuries of human warfare. You are not a tiger, Master Youngsu had told her during their last training session before she left Earth. He was 80 years old, thin and bent but still quick as lightning when he moved. Tigers are strong, fierce, proud. You are a human. You are small and soft and you break easily, but you are also clever, adaptable, and you never stop learning. Those are your weapons. Minji repeated the forms over and over, sometimes for 4 or 5 hours straight, until her muscles burned and her hands bled from gripping the blade. She programmed the holographic system to show her Vorath opponents, studying their movement patterns, their balance points, the way their tails affected their center of gravity. She learned that Vorath scales were hardest on the back and shoulders, but softer at the joints and neck. She learned that their eyes, while excellent for tracking movement, had a small blind spot directly below their chin. She learned that they preferred power over speed, overwhelming strikes over technical precision, and she learned that by every objective measure, she was outmatched. Vexthor was stronger, more experienced, better armed, and naturally armored. If this were a fair fight, she would lose in seconds, so she would have to make it an unfair fight. On the 5th night, she found she wasn't alone. An alien was sitting in the observation area above the training hall, watching her practice. Minji stopped mid-form, suddenly self-conscious. The alien was an insectoid, one of the kriv species with a hard carapace and multiple limbs.
As Minji watched, it climbed down from the observation area and approached her. "Forgive the intrusion," the kriv said in translated speech.
Its name badge read, Instructor Halthan. I have watched you practice for 3 nights now. Your movements are unusual. May I ask what style this is? Minji bowed slightly, a gesture of respect Master Youngsu had taught her. It's called Haidong Gumdo, sir. An old Earth martial art adapted for modern combat. My instructor modified it based on his experience in the colony wars. I see. Halthan moved closer, its multiple eyes studying her blade. I fought alongside human mercenaries during the frontier rebellions. The arena was already full when Minji arrived. She had expected a crowd, but not this. Thousands of cadets and officers filled the circular viewing platforms that ringed the combat floor. They represented dozens of species from across the galaxy. The massive Kravik beetles with their chittering mandibles, The elegant Mothra perched on upper levels with their translucent wings catching the light. Groups of Vorath clustered together, displaying their scales like a wall of living armor, and dozens of others she couldn't name. All of them had come to watch the spectacle. Very few had come to watch a fight. They had come to watch a lesson. Minji walked through the preparation area beneath the arena, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. She could hear the crowd, above the mix of alien voices creating a sound like ocean waves. Jiwan and Doyen had wanted to be here with her, but she had asked them to watch from the stands instead. This was something she needed to do alone. The preparation room was simple: a bench, a locker for equipment, and a mirror. Minji sat down and began her breathing exercises, the same ones Master Youngsu had taught her years ago. Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Breathe out for 4 counts. Let the nervousness flow away like water. Let the mind become still like a pond. She checked her equipment one final time. Standard academy training uniform, designed to allow full range of movement but offer minimal protection. Her family blade in its worn sheath, the leather wrap smooth under her fingers. Nothing else. The rules of the proving duels were ancient. Minimal armor, no advanced weapon systems, no outside assistance. Just skill, strength, and will. A tone sounded, indicating 5 minutes until the duel began. Minji stood and drew her blade partially, checking the edge one last time. The steel gleamed in the harsh lights. 300 years old, carried by 4 generations of her family, and still sharp enough to catch her reflection. She could see, her own eyes in the polished metal, dark, nervous, but steady. Not pride, she whispered to herself. Not stubbornness. Just the refusal to quit. She slid the blade back into its sheath and walked toward the arena entrance. The corridor opened into brightness and sound. The arena floor was 50 meters across, circular, with a surface designed to provide traction for a dozen different foot types. The ceiling was 30 meters high and lined with lights that illuminated every corner. There was nowhere to hide, no shadows to use, just open space and thousands of watching eyes. The crowd's noise increased as she stepped onto the arena floor. She heard laughter from some sections, saw aliens pointing and talking to their neighbors. The betting displays on the walls showed odds that had somehow gotten worse. 70 to 1 now. Someone in the crowd shouted something in a language she didn't understand, but the mocking tone was universal. Minji walked to the center of the arena and stopped at the marked position for the first combatant. She stood at attention, her hands at her sides, and waited. The crowd noise gradually decreased as they realized the duel was about to begin. A few final bets were placed. Then silence fell. The opposite entrance opened, and Commander Vexthor emerged. The crowd erupted, cheering, stomping, and a dozen different species-specific sounds of approval filled the arena. Vexthor was everything Minji was not. Tall, powerful, confident. His scales gleamed dark green under the lights, marked with scars that told stories of dozens of battles. He wore the same minimal uniform as Minji, but on him it looked like a formality rather than protection. His natural armor was better than anything fabric could provide. And his weapon made Minji's blade look like a child's toy. It was a great blade, nearly as tall as Minji herself, with edges that glowed a faint blue from the plasma field generators built into the metal. It was a modern weapon, technically allowed, under the rules because it didn't require external power. The plasma edge could cut through reinforced steel. Vexthor walked to his marked position across from Minji. The crowd quieted again, waiting. He looked down at her from his full height, and Minji saw contempt in his yellow eyes. Not anger, not even dislike. Just dismissal. She was beneath his notice, an insect to be crushed for the education of others. He didn't salute. The gesture was required by tradition, a sign of respect between warriors, but Vexthor simply stood there with his blade resting on his shoulder. The message was clear. She did not deserve his respect. Minji saluted anyway, bringing her fist to her chest in the formal academy manner. She held it for 3 seconds, then lowered her hand and waited. The arena master, a floating AI construct, announced the rules in multiple languages. Standard duel protocols. Fight until one combatant yields or is unable to continue. Medical team standing by. All weapons and techniques allowed within the stated constraints. The combatants acknowledged, with nods. Then Vex Thor began to speak, his voice amplified across the arena. You are here to witness an important lesson. A lesson about the nature of strength, the value of tradition, and the place of each species in our great galactic civilization. He gestured at Minji with his free hand. This human cadet represents a species that the Galactic Council, in its wisdom, chose to admit to our ranks. A species with no natural advantages, no exceptional abilities, and a history marked by constant internal conflict. They fight each other because they are too weak to face real challenges. The crowd murmured agreement. Minji stood still, her face neutral, her breathing steady. Let him talk. Words are just air. Humanity's admission to the Council was an act of compassion, Vex Thor continued, an attempt to uplift a struggling species. But compassion should not be confused with equality. Today, I will demonstrate why humans are not warriors, why they are survivors at best, struggling to adapt to a galaxy that has moved beyond their primitive ways. He finally looked directly at Minji. I take no pleasure in this, Cadet, but sometimes harsh truth serves better than gentle lies. Your species needs to understand its limitations. This is not cruelty, this is education. The arena master's voice cut through the tension. Combatants, take your positions. Minji drew her blade and settled into a ready stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, blade held in both hands at a 45-degree angle. The stance Master Youngsu called waiting water, ready to flow in any direction. Vex Thor lowered his great blade from his shoulder and held it casually in one hand. The tip pointed at the ground. He didn't bother with a formal stance. He didn't need one for this. Begin. Vex Thor moved fast, faster than something his size should be able to move. He crossed half the distance between them in 2 strides and brought his blade up in a massive overhead strike that would have split Minji in half if it connected. The plasma edge left a blue afterimage in the air. Minji wasn't there. She had stepped right and forward at an angle, the blade missing her by centimeters. She felt the heat from the plasma edge as it crashed into the arena floor, scoring the surface. Vex Thor recovered instantly and swept the blade horizontally. Again, Minji moved, ducking under the strike and backing away. The crowd laughed. She was running already. Just as expected, Vex Thor pursued, his longer legs covering ground quickly. He struck again and again, each blow powerful enough to kill. Each one planned to drive Minji toward the arena wall where she would have nowhere to dodge. And each time Minji barely avoided the strike, giving ground, moving backward, looking desperate. The crowd's laughter grew louder. Bets were being settled already. This wouldn't even last 5 minutes. This is human strategy, Vex Thor announced, still attacking. Retreat, hide, run, never advance, never commit to actual combat, just survive long enough for someone stronger to save them. His blade came down again. Minji parried this time rather than dodging, her steel meeting his plasma edge. The impact sent her skidding backward, her boots scraping across the arena floor. Vex Thor was so much stronger that even deflecting his strikes was difficult. You see, Vex Thor said to the crowd. No counterattack, no strategy, just desperation. He attacked again, a complex sequence of strikes. High, low, thrust, sweep. Minji dodged, parried, ducked, and rolled. She gave more ground. Her breathing was getting heavier. Sweat ran down her face. She looked tired, overwhelmed, outmatched. But in the observation areas, a few watchers were paying closer attention. Instructor Halton sat forward in its seat, its multiple eyes tracking Minji's movements. A young diplomat from the Lashara Collective stopped chatting with her companions and focused on the arena floor. And in the section where the human cadets sat together, Jiwon grabbed Doyeon's arm. Look at her footwork, Jiwon whispered urgently. She's not tired. She's counting. Doyeon looked closer. Jiwon was right. Despite Minji's apparent desperation, her movements were still precise. She wasn't just dodging randomly. Every step had purpose. Every parry was exactly as strong as it needed to be. And most importantly, Not a single one of Vexthor's strikes had actually touched her. 3 minutes had passed. Vexthor was still attacking, still confident, but he had noticed something too. The human was slower than him, weaker than him, using a primitive weapon against advanced technology. So why hadn't he hit her even once? He increased his speed, putting real effort into his strikes now. The blade moved faster, the combinations more complex. Minji continued to dodge and deflect, but now something changed in her movement. She wasn't just retreating. The silence in the arena lasted only seconds, but it felt longer. Commander Vexthor stared at the blood on his arm, then at the human cadet who had put it there. Around them, thousands of aliens tried to process what they had just witnessed. The unbeatable instructor had been cut by a first-year human using a primitive weapon. Vexthor's expression shifted. The contempt vanished, replaced by something harder and more dangerous, respect for a threat. He adjusted his grip on his great blade and settled into a proper combat stance for the first time. The demonstration was over. Now he would fight seriously. He came at Minji fast and focused, his strikes no longer theatrical but precise and deadly. The blade moved in combinations designed to overwhelm. High strike to force a block, low sweep to catch the legs, thrust to the center mass. These were techniques refined through decades of real combat. Not just training hall practice, but Minji had stopped running. She met his attacks not with strength but with technique, her blade redirecting his strikes rather than blocking them directly. When his overhead strike came down, she deflected it at an angle and stepped aside, letting his momentum carry him past her. When he swept low, she jumped and used his blade as a stepping point, her boot touching the flat of his weapon for just an instant before she flipped away. The crowd began to murmur, then to speak, then to shout. This wasn't supposed to happen. Vexthor was stronger, faster, better armed. Yet somehow the human was not just surviving, but beginning to control the rhythm of the fight. Minji's blade flashed out again, and another red line appeared on Vexthor's shoulder, right at the joint. He roared and spun, his tail whipping around at head height. Most opponents would have ducked. Minji dropped completely flat to the ground and rolled, coming up inside his guard again. Her blade traced a third cut across his knee joint. That was when Vexthor realized the pattern. She wasn't trying to kill him. Every strike hit a joint, a weak point in his natural armor. She was systematically cutting his mobility, making him slower, reducing his advantage. This wasn't desperate fighting. This was surgical precision. He backed away, creating distance, reassessing. His breathing was heavier now. The wounds weren't serious individually, but together they were affecting his movement. His right arm was slightly slower. His left leg didn't pivot as smoothly, and the human had studied him well enough to know exactly where to cut. The crowd was shouting now, voices raised in a dozen languages. The betting displays flickered as odds shifted dramatically. Juan and Doyen were on their feet, holding onto each other. Instructor Halthan was making rapid notes on a data pad. And Crone, the Vorath cadet who had mocked Minji in the corridor, sat frozen with his mouth open. Minji began to speak as she circled Vexthor, keeping just out of his range. Her voice was steady, conversational, as if they were discussing tactics in a classroom rather than fighting for their lives. You studied our history and saw only war. You should have looked deeper, Commander. Vexthor lunged forward with a thrust. Minji sidestepped and let the blade pass within centimeters of her body, then struck again. A fourth cut opened across his other forearm. She continued speaking as if nothing had happened. Humanity fought 15,000 documented wars on our homeworld alone. Do you know what that taught us? Not just how to kill. It taught us how to read an opponent, how to adapt, how to find the weakness in any defense, because if we couldn't, we died. Vexthor tried a different approach, using his tail to strike while his blade attacked from another angle. Minji dropped under the tail, parried the blade with minimal effort, and struck again. Fifth cut, across his ribs where the scales were thinnest. She was inside and out before he could react. You called us weak because we're not the strongest species. You're right. We're not. Humans are not naturally strong. We're not naturally fast. We don't have armor or claws or venom. Sixth cut, back of his sword hand. His grip weakened slightly. She danced away before he could counter. You called us primitive because our technology developed differently. Because we use steel when you use plasma. Because we fought with blades when you fought with energy weapons, perhaps. But do you know why we kept using blades even after we invented guns? Even after we reached the stars? Vexthor roared and launched a massive combination attack, every technique he knew trying to overwhelm her through sheer variety. Minji flowed around the strikes like water, her movements smooth and practiced. Master Youngsu had made her practice these exact sequences 10,000 times. Dodge, parry, redirect, counter. It was as natural as breathing now. 7th cut across his left shoulder, 8th cut along his right thigh. Neither strike deep enough to cripple, but together they were wearing him down. We kept using blades because sometimes you need to fight quietly. Sometimes you need to fight in zero gravity where guns are dangerous. Sometimes your power runs out and you need something that works every time, in any condition without fail. We kept using blades because we learned that simple tools in skilled hands beat complex tools in unskilled ones. Vexthor was bleeding from a dozen wounds now. None of them serious, but his uniform was stained red. His movements were slower, and for the first time in 40 years, he was losing a duel. The realization showed in his eyes. Shock, disbelief, and underneath it all, a growing fear. Minji saw it and felt no satisfaction, only a grim determination to finish what had been started. She pressed her attack now, no longer waiting for him to come to her. Her blade moved faster than most of the crowd could follow, each strike precise and purposeful. She targeted his injuries, making them worse, forcing him to compensate, throwing off his balance. 9th cut across his already injured knee. He stumbled. 10th cut along his extended arm. He nearly dropped his blade. But you made the fatal error, Commander. You made the mistake that every strong opponent makes when facing someone they think is weak. She struck again and again, her blade singing through the air. 11th cut, 12th, 13th. Vexthor was trying to defend now, all thoughts of attack abandoned. He was just trying to keep her blade away from vital areas, trying to create space, trying to figure out how this had happened. You assumed that survival meant nothing, that adaptation meant nothing, that the refusal to surrender meant nothing. Minji's voice was harder now, carrying the weight of 3 centuries of her family's history, of every human who fought impossible odds, of every warrior who refused to accept defeat. You assumed that because humans fought each other, we learned nothing useful. But Commander, we learned everything. Every type of combat, every form of warfare. We fought in deserts and jungles and cities and space stations. We fought underwater and in zero gravity and in toxic atmospheres. We fought with every weapon ever invented, and some we made up as we went along. We became the most experienced warriors in the galaxy, not because we wanted to, but because if we didn't learn, we died. Vexthor tried one last desperate attack, abandoning all technique and just swinging with every bit of strength he had left. It was the move of a frightened fighter, not a master warrior. Minji saw it coming from his shoulder movement and his weight shift. She had seen this exact desperation attack in her studies of human warfare, in videos of soldiers who knew they were losing and made one final attempt. She didn't dodge this time. Instead, she stepped into the strike at precisely the right moment and angle. Her blade met his, but not to block or parry. She caught his weapon at the weakest point in its swing, where his leverage was worst and hers was best. Using a technique her great-grandmother had perfected against heavier opponents, she twisted her wrists and applied force at exactly the right vector. The great plasma blade flew from Vexthor's hands, spinning through the air, its blue glow leaving a trail across everyone's vision. It clattered to the arena floor 3 meters away. The crowd went completely silent again. Even breathing seemed to stop. Commander Vexthor stood disarmed, bleeding from 15 wounds, facing a human cadet who was barely breathing hard. Minji's blade rested against his throat, the steel pressing lightly against the softest part of his neck where a single thrust would end the duel permanently. She could kill him. The rules allowed it. He had certainly planned to seriously injure her as a lesson to others. She had every right to finish this, but Minji had never killed anyone. Her great-grandmother, grandmother, and mother had all taken lives, but only when absolutely necessary, only to protect others. This wasn't necessary. The lesson had been taught. The point had been proven. She looked into Vexthor's eyes and saw something she hadn't expected. Understanding. The contempt was gone. The dismissal was gone. In its place was the recognition of one warrior acknowledging another. He had lost, and he knew exactly why. Minji spoke quietly. Her words meant only for him, though the arena's acoustics carried them to the crowd anyway. Yield, Commander. I have proven my point. I don't need to prove it further. For a long moment, Vexthor said nothing. His pride was a living thing, a force that had sustained him through 40 years of victory. Yielding would break it. Yielding would end his legend. Yielding would acknowledge that everything he had said about humans was wrong. But Vexthor was also a true warrior, and true warriors understood when they had been beaten. He had made errors in this fight, underestimating his opponent. Minji made it to the preparation room before her legs started shaking. The adrenaline that had carried her through the duel was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She sat down heavily on the bench and carefully placed her blade across her knees. Her hands were trembling as she reached for a cleaning cloth. The blade was stained red with Vexthor's blood. She cleaned it slowly and methodically, the way Master Youngsu had taught her. Respect the weapon. Respect what it had done. Her grandmother used to say that every drop of blood on the blade represented a moment when death was close, and those moments deserved acknowledgement. Minji had just fought the most important battle of her life. She had won. But she felt no triumph, just a bone-deep tiredness and the weight of what she had proven, not just for herself, but for every human who would come after her. The door opened, and Jiwon rushed in, followed by Doyun. They both stopped when they saw her sitting there, still in her blood-stained uniform, mechanically cleaning her blade. "Minji," Jiwon said softly. Then she crossed the room and pulled Minji into a fierce hug. "You did it. You actually did it." Doyun joined them, his voice thick with emotion. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. The way you moved, the way you fought. I didn't know humans could do that." "Any human could do it," Minji said quietly. She finished cleaning the blade and slid it back into its sheath. "They just needed someone to show them first, that's all I did. I showed them what we are when someone finally takes us seriously." Over the next several hours, as word of the duel spread across the Academy's communication networks, everything changed. The video of the fight was analyzed in tactical classes, breaking down Minji's technique frame by frame. Instructors who had dismissed human combat methods before now requested access to Earth's martial arts archives. Cadets who had mocked the humans before now nodded respectfully when they passed in the corridors. Crone, the Vorath cadet who had harassed Minji, approached her in the cafeteria 2 days later. He stood at her table where she was eating with Jiwon and Doyun, looking uncomfortable. His 2 friends stood behind him, equally awkward. "Cadet Minji," Crone said formally, "I owe you an apology. I judged your species without knowledge. I called you weak without understanding what strength means. I was wrong." Minji looked up at him, remembering his claws digging into her shoulder, his mocking words. She could dismiss him, make him feel the way he had made her feel. But what would that prove? "Apology accepted," she said simply. "We all learn. Some lessons are just harder than others." Crone nodded gratefully and left. Doyun watched him go and shook his head in amazement. A week ago he was calling us pests. Now he's apologizing. Everything's different. "Not everything," Minji said. "We still have to pass our classes. We still have to prove ourselves every day. One duel doesn't change centuries of assumptions. It just opens the door." But the door was opening wider than even Minji expected. 3 days after the duel, she was summoned to the Academy's administrative sector. She walked through corridors she had never seen before, past offices belonging to senior staff and military officers. Her escort, a young ensign from the Lashara Collective, spoke to her as they walked. "The video of your duel has been transmitted across the galactic network," the ensign said. "It's being watched on thousands of worlds. Military academies are analyzing your technique. The Galactic Council has received requests from 15 species asking about human combat training programs." Minji didn't know what to say to that. She had just been trying to survive, to honor her family, to prove humanity belonged here. She hadn't meant to start a revolution. The ensign led her to a conference room where several high-ranking officers waited. To her surprise, Commander Vexthor was there too. His wounds had been treated, but the cuts were still visible on his scales. He stood when she entered and saluted her properly, the gesture of respect between warriors. Minji saluted back, then took the seat they indicated. An admiral from the insectoid species, his name badge reading Admiral Kresh, spoke first. Cadet Minji, your duel with Commander Vexthor has created significant interest throughout the galaxy. We've called you here to discuss the implications. Commander Vexthor has requested permission to speak first. The Vorath warrior stood, his posture different from before, less arrogant, more thoughtful. Cadet Minji, I spent 40 years believing I understood combat. I studied traditional warfare, honored techniques passed down through millennia of Vorath history, and I never lost because I was good at what I knew. But you showed me that I had stopped learning. I had become comfortable with my knowledge and closed my mind to new possibilities. He gestured at the holographic display on the conference table, which showed footage from the duel. I have watched this recording 50 times. Each time I see new things. The efficiency of your movements, the way you used my strength against me, the precision of your strikes. These are not primitive techniques. These are refined methods developed through actual combat experience, not just training hall practice. Vexthor looked directly at Minji. I have submitted a formal request to the Academy leadership. I want permission to travel to Earth and study human martial traditions. I want to learn what your species knows about combat, about adaptation, about surviving against superior opponents. If my request is approved, would you be willing to introduce me to your master Youngsu? Minji sat stunned. Commander Vexthor, the warrior who had mocked humanity and tried to prove their unworthiness, wanted to learn from them, wanted to go to Earth and study human fighting styles? I would be honored, Commander, she said carefully, though I should warn you that Master Youngsu is not an easy teacher. He made me practice the same movement 10,000 times before he was satisfied. Good, Vexthor said. A slight smile crossed his reptilian features. I clearly need a teacher who doesn't accept mediocrity. Admiral Kresh spoke again. Your duel has raised important questions about our training methods at the Academy. We have focused on traditional approaches, teaching cadets the techniques of their own species. But you have demonstrated that there is value in studying how other species fight, especially species that developed combat methods under different conditions. We are proposing a new program, interspecies martial arts exchange. Human instructors teaching other species teaching humans, sharing knowledge instead of keeping it separated. Another officer, a Mothra with translucent wings, added, The Galactic Council is also reconsidering humanity's role in peacekeeping operations. Your species has extensive experience with asymmetric warfare, urban combat, and fighting in extreme conditions. These are valuable skills for missions other species find challenging. There is discussion of forming human-led units for certain types of operations. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing possibilities and implications. By the end, Minji's head was spinning. She had just wanted to pass her classes and make her family proud. Now she was part of discussions about changing how the entire galaxy thought about combat training. When the meeting finally ended, Vexthor asked to speak with her privately. They walked to an observation deck overlooking the planet below. For a while they stood in silence, watching ships come and go. I owe you more than an apology, Vexthor said eventually. You could have killed me in that arena. The rules allowed it. I had certainly planned to injure you severely as a lesson. But you showed mercy. You proved your point without unnecessary harm. That is also a lesson I needed to learn. My mother told me something before she died, Minji said. She said that anyone can destroy, but it takes real strength to build. I didn't want to destroy you, Commander. I just wanted you to understand that humanity deserves to be here. I understand now, Vexthor said, and I will spend the rest of my career making sure others understand too. Your species has earned more than tolerance. You've earned respect, and I will help you claim it. Over the following weeks, the changes continued to ripple outward. The human cadets noticed it first in small ways. Other species asking them about Earth, inviting them to study groups, treating them as equals rather than curiosities. The betting pools on Academy duels started including human cadets with reasonable odds. Instructors called on human students to share perspectives from Earth's military history. Minji wrote long letters to Taemin, telling him everything. She told him about the duel, about the aftermath, about how people saw humans differently now. She told him that the blade was coming home with honor intact, just as their mother had promised. She told him that the stars were beautiful, but Earth was still home, and she couldn't wait to visit during the next leave cycle. Master Youngsu sent her a message after watching the duel recording. It was typically brief. You made the willow bend. Good. Now teach others to do the same. 6 weeks after the duel, the Galactic News Network ran a feature story about humanity's integration into galactic society. The reporter, a journalist from a species known for their objectivity, interviewed Minji and several other humans at the Academy. The final question was predictable, but important. Cadet Minji, before your duel, many species questioned whether humanity belonged in the Galactic Military Academy. Do you think that question has been answered? Minji thought about her great-grandmother fighting in Earth's unification